Welcome to Orchid Time. Today I'd like to introduce my Mottled-Leaf Paphiopedilums, two of which are in bloom. So slipper orchids are probably my favorite orchids, and right now Paph delenatii here is my favorite slipper. This is a species Paphiopedilum with a fairly compact growth habit, and here mine is in bloom for the first time. And it is even more adorable in person than in photos I have seen. Let me turn it around because the back is also really pretty. Look at that. So I haven't had this plant for a particularly long time. I just got it in September of last year from Hsinying's. This is a small young plant. It's just a single growth. And I actually got it in the seedling pot size, although the plant itself is a blooming size plant, which is why I got it. Let's see if I can show you the leaf modeling. This delenatii has a really pretty leaf pattern, and the undersides of the leaves are quite purple, also with a pattern. So this is a fairly small plant. Here's my hand next to it, but it is already in bloom. What's amazing about this flower is that Paph delenatii can be fragrant, but not every individual is. This one is, and I wasn't sure what to expect because the fragrance is described as being kind of like raspberries or roses, and this one does smell like roses. Exactly like a sort of sweet, very clean rose scent, almost like candied roses to me. My roommate also described it as sort of a citrusy rose. I don't detect that, but to me it's a very striking rose scent. It doesn't fill the room. You do need to get right in there to smell it, but once you get close, the fragrance is amazing. So Paph delenatii is supposed to be one of the best Paphiopedilums for beginners because it is easy to care for and a very vigorous grower, and so far I have found this to be true. As I said, I got it in a seedling pot size when it was very much not a seedling anymore. It only had 2 roots, quite a few leaves, and it was making do in that environment, so I wasn't sure what to expect. If it would shock when I brought it home. But it immediately started growing as soon as I repotted it, which paphs do tend to do. And it just churned out, I think, 2 or 3 leaves within a couple of months of my bringing it home. And now it has bloomed. So very vigorous, wonderful plant for me so far. This is Paphiopedilum Magic Lantern. This is a primary hybrid between delenatii, which I just showed you, and micranthum, which is another species. I acquired this plant last year in June, so I've had it for almost a year from Nat's Orchids. And as you can see, it is a small plant, and I think part of that is this hybrid is a small growing hybrid, but I think it's also young, even though it has quite a few leaves. I was hoping it would be blooming size. It has not yet bloomed for me. But as you can see, it has just beautiful leaf modeling. And the undersides of the leaves have a very similar pattern to delenatii, which I think is very cute. I like that pattern. So Paph Magic Lantern is supposed to be quite easy to grow, and it's often recommended on lists of slipper orchids for beginners. And it has grown very well for me throughout the year that I've had it. However, in more recent reading that I've done, I've seen that some people have difficulty blooming it, and I was hoping it would bloom for me, and it hasn't, like I said. So that might be because micranthum, one of its parents, well, both of its parents require a cool down in winter. So I had it on a cold windowsill And that was enough to get the delenatii to bloom. And I was hoping that since delenatii is one of the parents, maybe magic lantern had the same requirements. But it turns out that my micranthum actually needs a much bigger cool down. And not only does it need cold over the wintertime, it needs like no warmth. So it, like most orchids, it appreciates a difference in temperature between day and night, and that the overnight low should be pretty low, like in the 50s Fahrenheit or lower for my micranthum. I don't think delenatii likes to get quite as cold as my micranthum, so to be safe, I didn't let them get below, I think, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit on a windowsill. But some of the reading I've done recently suggests that my micranthum needs to not be above 60 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. So not only does it need to cool down at night, it needs to stay cool during the day. And I did not do that for this plant. So maybe next winter I will try that and see if it works. It is also supposed to have a reduction in watering during that cool down period, which I also didn't wind up doing because it kept growing. And I feel strongly that any plant that's trying to grow leaves should not be deprived of water or fertilizer. So I did water and fertilize it even during the cooler period. I don't wet the leaves of my orchids when I water them, so I wasn't so concerned about developing bacterial or fungal issues because I was watering when it was in a cooler environment. But I was hoping that even though I was watering, it would maybe still consider it a winter rest, and it didn't. So for this upcoming winter, I guess I will try to give it a bigger cool down with no day warming, because in the daytime, I think that windowsill probably didn't get all the way up to room temperature, which is 72-ish degrees or 70 degrees. But it definitely got quite a bit warmer. So I'm going to avoid that, and I will try to withhold water, see if that helps. But so this has been Paph Magic Lantern, which will hopefully bloom, but not this year. This is another delenatii hybrid. This is Paphiopedilum Armeni white. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it is the primary hybrid between delenatii and Armeniacum, which is another species Paph. So this is also a compact growing small-leaved Paph with mottled leaves. I'll show you the modeling. The modeling is also quite similar to that of Magic Lantern, and the undersides are a lot like those of delenatii. And I got this plant last August, actually, from a fellow Orchid Society member who was moving away and downsizing her collection. So got to get this awesome delenatii hybrid for a steal. This plant, I can't tell if it has two fans or if it's two seedlings. You can kind of see they're pretty far apart. So I think it might actually be two seedlings because Paph growths do tend to be connected at the base. So I guess I have potentially two Armeni whites here. And the previous owner cares for her paphs a bit differently than I do, so I may need to try her routine, which I will mention a bit later when I talk about how I care for all of them. This flower, if I ever get to see it, I would expect to be large and white, bigger than delenatii, because Armeniacum, the other parent, has quite a bit larger flower than delenatii, if I understand it correctly. I haven't seen it in person. Quite a bit larger, and it is a brilliant yellow. However, there's a really cool genetic thing between delenatii and Armeniacum. See if I can remember this correctly. So Paph delenatii produces pink pigment and blocks the production of yellow, except for in like the very center of it. And Armeniacum is very yellow, produces yellow pigment, and blocks the production of pink. So when you cross them, the pink of delenatii is blocked, and the yellow of Armeniacum is blocked. And you get a completely white flower with like a little yellow center. So it sounds really cool. I'm hoping I get to see it at some point. So, Paph Armeni white. This is yet another Paph species, actually the first one that I ever got, chronologically speaking. This is Paphiopedilum purpuratum. As you can see, it also has beautiful mottled leaves. This mottling is very similar to that of the Maudiae-type hybrids because it's one of the parents of the Maudiae-type hybrids. Not one that's used very frequently in the current most popular hybrids, but one of the foundation species that was used when those hybrids were developed. So some of them have this as an ancestor. I got this purpuratum last September, so I've had it for a little over 6 months, from Terry Parton, who is a local orchid breeder who operates out of Hausermann's, but is not directly affiliated with them. I got this plant in bud, so it has actually bloomed for me, but not by me getting it to bloom. So this plant has 2 growths right now. You can see the old one that has bloomed, and it had already started on this one when I got it, but it is also developing very nicely. This species is supposed to be also very laid back and an easy grower. So far that is true, although I haven't had it very long. And the flower on this particular individual is really one of the better purpuratum flowers that I've ever seen. It is quite a bit improved over some of the older photos that you would see. Very cute. This plant, I have it quite close to the camera, so it looks large. It is not very large. Here's a comparison with my hand. And so the flower is not tiny, but it is not like a monster giant flower. So it is a sort of a small, cute, compact paph. What's cool about the flower is that initially when it opens, the sepal is quite round and oval. And then over about 3 days after opening, it folds back. And I honestly don't know which form I like better. I think they're both very cute. But it's neat because you sort of get 2 flower shapes in one over time. So when I got this paph in fall, it was blooming in fall. And I think in nature it does often bloom in fall. However, the vendor told me that sometimes when you have a fall blooming plant, once you bring it home and it acclimates to sort of the seasons of your home, it may turn out to be a spring bloomer. So I'm interested to see when the new growth that's developing right here, when it matures, will it bloom in fall as the first growth did, or will it bloom in spring with all of my other paphs? So that'll be interesting to see. And here is the first non-phalaenopsis orchid that I ever got. It's been with me almost from the beginning. I've had it for 2 years. It is Paph Hsinying Carlos Dark Night by Hsinying Leopard, and it is a Maudiae-type hybrid. So I'm going to show you the foliage first. It's very similar modeling to purpuratum, which I just showed you. And it has now grown quite a bit for me. You can see it has 3 growths and 1 more developing here, 1 small one, so 4 total. As I said, I got this plant 2 years ago from Nat's Orchids, and I got it in bloom, and it has rebloomed every year for me in March. So let me readjust the camera so you can see the flower. So this is the flower, and as you can see, it's quite large. Whoop, here's my hand. Here's Paph Magic Lantern next to the flower. It's an enormous flower, and it is very striking. Let me show you the back as well, because that looks cool too. Oh. So as I mentioned before, this is a Maudiae-type hybrid with quite a complex background, and it's primarily descended from Paph colossum, which you can see in how large the dorsal sepal is, and also its patterning. They're very similar. Because it's a complex Maudiae hybrid, it is incredibly easygoing, very easy to grow, and very forgiving, which made it a lucky pick for my first non-foul. You can kind of see on the leaves, I'm going to move back down to the leaves and show you. So you can see on the leaves that some of them are quite pleated, others are not. So the pleated leaves are times when the plant dried out quite a lot. Like this extremely dry leaf is when I was sick with the flu and didn't water it for, I don't know how long. I was sick for like 2 months. I'm sure I watered it at least once in that 2 months. But most orchids, you don't water them for 2 months when they're actively growing, and they will die. This plant did not. It's incredibly forgiving. I mean, the leaves show that it didn't always get the best care, but the plant has bloomed and grown consistently for 2 years while teaching me how to take care of orchids, basically. Here's another flu leaf. So initially when I first got it, and I didn't know what I was doing, it grew just one growth that year, fairly slowly, and with eventually at the end of that year, sad pleated leaves, and then it bloomed anyway, even though it had been mistreated. In the last year, I finally figured out how to take care of paphs, and I got more than one, which really helps. If you only have one of a particular type of orchid and a bunch of other ones, you're going to tend to take care of the odd one out the same way. And paphs require more frequent watering than my phals do. So this guy was already running on less water than you would perhaps have preferred. So once you have more than one plant of a particular type, you kind of establish a care routine for them as a group. And then also, once you know what you're doing, you're able to take care of them better. And that's definitely been the case for me. So in the last year, I finally figured out how to take care of this guy. And I learned that when a paph of this type is happy, it will actually produce 2 growths sequentially in a season. One, which will mature. So this one is the one that was new this year and matured to bloom. And then another, which is not yet mature, but which has been growing at the same time as this one for most of the year. I think it started up in summer. So I don't know if this new small growth would be able to bloom before next March, because this is the first time that I've actually taken excellent care of a plant, of a paph. So we'll see what happens, but that's really cool. So it's good to know that I finally figured out how to keep a paph not only growing and blooming, but actually like thriving. So now I'd like to talk a bit about how I care for my mottled-leaf paphs. All of these guys grow in a northeast windowsill. The smallest ones, so everybody except the Maudiae-type hybrid, are small enough to fit on the windowsill itself, and then the Maudiae hybrid is on a little cart right in front of the windowsill, so they get the same kind of light. Primarily filtered light, even early in the morning. They get a bit of direct but filtered sun just for the first few hours of the morning, and then it's pretty much indirect but fairly bright light for the rest of the day. The windowsill is not insulated in any way, so they got a temperature drop over winter to I think a low of about 55 degrees Fahrenheit in the evenings, And then in the day, it would be room temperature of probably a little bit cooler than 70 Fahrenheit. I water them in winter. Well, I water them just as they begin to dry out. So in winter, that's been about every 5 to 7 days, depending. In the summertime, especially when it gets very hot, they do require more frequent watering. This house is also drier than the old house where I've had most of them for a longer period than here. So I had to readjust my watering when we moved here. And as I mentioned before, I did not necessarily adjust quickly enough, so they did go through a bit of a stress with watering as I was learning the new watering requirements. I do have humidity trays nearby, but not directly on the same windowsill with them. So I don't know how effective they are at humidifying the environment for these paphs. Ideally, they would have high humidity. In nature, the species do have quite high humidity. Like the lowest the humidity would be about 70%, going all the way up to 90% humidity. And in my house, on a good day, it's about 40%. So that's probably quite stressful for them, but I do have them clustered. They're close together, so hopefully they're generating a bit of humidity for each other. In the past, I have never summered my paphs outside, but the previous owner of the Armeni white always has summered her plants outside, so and recommended it. So I'm considering trying it, although I'm a little nervous because we have a lot of wildlife passing through our yard, like chipmunks and squirrels and rabbits and deer and birds. And I would be concerned about just leaving out a buffet of orchids for snacking and ripping up. And it's also quite windy, so I would be interested in finding an outdoor spot for them that's protected and up off the ground, safe from critters, but I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to try that this year. I'll report back if I find a suitable protected location. They do need good, strong air movement, but I'm concerned that the intense wind that we get, like past the house and through the yard, would dry them out faster than I'd be able to keep up with watering, because I'm not necessarily always here standing by with water. So we'll see. Up until this point, caring for them indoors, like I said, I water them every 5 or so days in the winter and more often than that in the summer, particularly when it's very hot. I think the most often that I had to water last summer, when it was in the mid-90s Fahrenheit, was about every 3 days. And I feed about every other watering, depending on if I remember to. So I use MSU fertilizer for tap water, because I do water these guys with tap water, which they seem fine with. And I use it a little bit, well, I kind of switch between using it at the recommended strength and then diluting it a bit. The paphs don't seem to care, but some of my other plants do. And if I'm making up like a stock solution, and I don't feel like diluting it perfectly for each plant individually, I'll just make it one concentration and then give it to everybody. I have not seen any kind of fertilizer damage on any of these plants, and they don't seem particularly sensitive so far. Oh, and I don't use any supplemental light for these guys, although I've heard that even mottled-leaf paphs would appreciate supplemental lighting, even though they are lower light paphs. So far it's just the indirect light from the windowsill, and then when they go outside, they will be in indirect, like shaded light there as well. So these have been my mottled-leaf Paphiopedilums, 2 of which are in bloom right now, and I will report back if any more decide to spike for me. Thanks for watching.